Guys, apologies about the resolution of this video. The BBC really has to get its kind of act together on its YouTube channel. I'm going to begin with just
I need
2 minutes from this.
scarcely bigger than a mosquito is one of these gall wasps.
Good old days.
There are lots of them flying around here at flowers. Most of the flowers by now have been pollinated and are about to develop into acorns. The gall wasps too have mated, and this female is... She thrusts her ovipositor to the base of the fertilized flower and injects an egg. And that triggers a profound genetic change in the growing egg bud. It develops not into an acorn, but into something very different, a gall. Within, the tiny larva, whose secretions of causal change, feeds on the oak tree's tissues. As summer proceeds, the galls become increasingly hard and woody. Autumn comes, and the oak tree starts to shed its leaves. It's shutting down for the winter, and with its leaves go both acorns and galls. Plant and insect life is suspended. But unseen changes are nevertheless taking place. Spring comes at last. Inside the gall, something starts moving. The larva has turned into an adult wasp. It has spent 9 months within the oak tree's tissues. It has only a few weeks of its life left. Now, as an adult, it must look for another oak to inject with eggs. A single oak tree may be afflicted by 70 different kinds of gall, each produced by a different species of wasp, and each with its own particular contorted shape.
Guys, if you're curious about that, I strongly recommend looking at the rest of that video, because what happens next is wild. But, just now, I'll just put this in view full screen. So, thank you, David. That's how most of us have come to kind of like, you know, see the natural world or understand something about it. This is an oak gall, like what you were just learning about. So, and that's growing in a tree that's in the ground about 16 months, you know. So, wonderful thing to introduce students, but also, like myself, quite frankly, to these little critters that are out there. These are, you know, to expand the idea of what a wasp is or can be beyond Vespa vulgaris, which we all know and loathe, to kind of understand that there's actually impossible diversity out there, you know. And many of these things are signature to species in the environment, they need habitat, they need particular things. They live independently of us. They have nothing to do with us, really. I don't know if there's anyone from Blanchardstown. I'm really sorry, this is very heavy-handed. Blanchardstown is not famed for its tree cover or its biodiversity. And I think both myself and Anthony's projects were both beneficiaries of the kind of enlightened thinking and access in the national museums, which is really, really great. Artists and other publics getting access to the archives to kind of reckon with these. So this is kind of day 18 from this project, the microforest, and this is the transition year group visiting the National Resource Collection Centre in Swords, a former Motorola factory, which is the home for all the kind of spillover objects, the many millions of objects that Anthony referenced, you know. So it's a really remarkable place. And here's the class there going and looking in particular at two things. I think that's a collection of wasps there, different oak gall wasps, but also this kind of impossible kind of diversity of things, that is now pinned and codified. Many of which these things, these critters, they're no longer with us, or they're no longer with us, certainly in the plenitude and diversity they once were. So it's kind of like a curious kind of place. This was our one and only field trip with the group. And then I wanted to bring it back to kind of a habitat, a functioning habitat that's 3 years old here. It's actually 4 years old, just there. This is it in May. And, this idea that, we can make habitat. We can attract things back into our lives, back into our worlds. We can change the way we live and the habitats we have to kind of make room for what's technically termed more than human worlds. So other kind of things. So, this idea that we can place make for human and more than human worlds, what we have here is actually an established little microforest woodland. It's established, which is to say it's got its own life, it's kind of sovereign from kind of human inputs, in that it creates enough canopy to kind of arrest kind of weed growth on its woodland floor, its microforest floor. And those leaves in turn fall creating mulch, so kind of again suppressing other kind of plant growth, but creating kind of conditions for then a multiplication of life, like fungi, bacteria, other insects. When you get insects, you get birds, and so on and so on. So this is kind of like, this is an interesting kind of place created relatively few years. When you've created a space like this is from day 37 from the project. The previous one was from day 40. When you create such a place, you can, create like occasions to invite really interesting practitioners to come in and interface with this place, activate this place, and create like really novel kind of pedagogical moments in the lives of kind of young people. So who we have here is Nessa Darcy, who describes herself as an artist, illustrator, a creative entomologist. That's her kind of thing, insects. And it was great. We actually caught and observed and then released an oak gall wasp that day, first time. So, how to kind of shift ways of seeing, being. Back to the oak gall wasp, what did it ever do for us? Well, up until the 1900s, the invention of kind of synthetic ink, most ink in Europe was made from oak gall, black ink. And it's kind of like, I'm just kind of using this kind of manuscript of a cat that dipped its, sometime in the 15th century in Croatia, a cat that wandered across a manuscript and left its kind of indelible mark on that manuscript. That ink would have been oak gall ink. So it's a fair contribution of this little creature that has this relationship with oak trees to civilization, I think it's fair to say, to culture. Now, day 19, so I'm jumping around here with the dates, but it would be exhaustive to go from day 1 to 44. Day 19, again, occasion to have a wonderful artist, an educator, Dr. Eileen Hutton, come and introduce natural dyes, pigments, colours, things that can be derived from our existing kind of ecosystem if it's diverse and complex. And again, students kind of like turning their hand, quite kind of in a medieval fashion almost, in a kind of fantastic kind of bestiary, making these like fantastic birds, using oak gall ink and using other pigments that Eileen provided. Which brings us to this kind of sense of, this kind of a quote by the anthropologist Tim Ingold, where he says, we're losing the presence of things. Only when we actually acknowledge the presence of things can we begin to care. So if we don't see things, if we don't acknowledge things, we don't care. I kind of approach a lot of the work I do kind of anthropologically, and I'm no expert, but it's remarkable. We're a culture, we're a civilization that doesn't really know the names of trees, don't really know the birds in the sky, know nothing about their behaviours. Most of us, like generally as a culture, We don't know the names of the plants under our feet. We're suffering from a radical disconnect from our environment. And it diminishes, I think it diminishes ourselves greatly. So just kind of back to day 18, the finale of this day, the good people in the archive. We finished in a room, all the students just remember the smell. The smell left, again, an indelible impression on them. And this is where I asked the curators there to put out an example of each one bird that you would find in a diverse, fully functioning native, let's not say native, indigenous Irish woodland. And that's kind of some of the examples there, some kind of fantastic animals that bird life that would contribute to a complex web of life, and create a complex kind of eco-acoustic in that woodland. I don't know if anyone's ever been to a robust woodland. The sounds are incredible. You don't have many in this country. You have to go elsewhere for that. So again, that kind of created an occasion, how do we bring these things back to life? Without becoming necromancers. How do we do that? And this was a kind of wonderful, again, this project is a framework occasion to invite Mick Fortune, artist and folklorist, to kind of work with the students, and each student, they worked in pairs, and they worked with kind of through mimicry and finding out about each of these species that would or can, or maybe will inhabit diverse indigenous woodlands again. And they created kind of bird calls, which was a kind of lot of fun, a wonderful kind of outcome. The bird calls were then broadcast over the school intercom system to kind of create an unusual occasion in the day. So anyway, guys, that was one big long digression, and apologies for that. What is a microforest? A microforest was developed by a man named Akira Muriwaki in the 1970s. Muriwaki studied forest soils, and he was really interested in the microbial and fungal networks within soil way before it became fashionable. And he was interested in how to replicate these conditions of what he would call ancient forest soil. That's to say, trees that have lived and grown, some are died and rotted, and created very particular kind of conditions in the ground to promote, trees and further life. So that's what he kind of focused on, is how to create those conditions, but on a small scale level, so that these kind of complex webs of life could be plugged into kind of urban kind of contexts in Japan and elsewhere. So, microforest or tiny forest, it's, about the size of a tennis court, and kind of densely packed, but it's all in the soil. And then the soil being enriched just so, when you put saplings in it, it's kind of mimicking what happens in a forest when a big tree falls. You've got all these little trees ready to go. They're already kind of plugged into the earth, plugged into the soil, and they're ready to grow and thrive and in a race for light. Day one, I was invited by Super Projects. If you look at the date there, yeah, we're just well in the pandemic. I've been teaching sculpture on Zoom in NCAD. Not good. Don't do that. Don't teach sculpture on Zoom. Don't teach anything on Zoom, really. These kids as well, or this transition year cohort, which was just kind of starting, they would have had an amnesty on their junior cert because of the pandemic. There was a real kind of desire, we need to get people back face to face. We need face-to-face learning. A way to facilitate that is to go outdoors. So I was approached by Super Projects, who I know you heard from Rain yesterday, and this kind of happened coeval with what I was trying to do in NCD. I got access to a space in NCD which is now become an NCD field, and this was a modality. We meet and we learn outdoors, because at least then we can meet outdoors, because we can't do indoor work. So this was a kind of curiosity, and again, I'd say Anthony will speak to this. Wonderful teachers that are gatekeepers for these projects, without which nothing happens. This is Mary Quinn's art classroom, and the idea was to create an extension of this space out into this kind of very generic green, 1980s style school space. And then to kind of entertain another form of pedagogy that's experimental, experiential, environmental, and to kind of impart or transmit to students and to ourselves, there's other ways of learning. Everything isn't just about the head. Learning is indeed, it's cognitive, yes, it's intellectual, it's also material, it's experiential, it's philosophical, it's emotional. So to kind of try and use this space critically, urgently, to bring students back together into the world, as a lot of damage was being done. I'm going to fast forward there, day 14, and you can see this is the County Council delivering a wonderful pile of well-rotted wood mulch, which already had interesting kind of fungal and stuff going on. And that's them delivering it, and this is our team of guys out in the middle of December, digging, drubbing, preparing the soil. So this is the kind of format to be proportionate for the microforest we went with. Again, this idea of creating 150 meters square for trees and 50 meter kind of core for people. And then kind of, to bring people back together, to work together, to enact something on their school grounds was rather empowering, and I was very impressed. Fair play to the young people of Ireland today. They can still dig, and they can use a shovel. Like, my respect, I take my hat off. They really got into it, because they really got this kind of sense of, we imparted the concept of metal, that work can be social, work can be fun, work can be kind of generative, and they really took that on, and they dug. You can see half them wearing their masks there. In terms of kind of species, it works in terms of a canopy, which is your big trees. That's where your oaks go. You have kind of an understory where you have kind of smaller trees, such as maybe birch or alder, and then all the way down where you have an understory, you have shrub, and you have a herbaceous layer. So we went with 21 species, 456 plants, all in. And then a lot of people plant trees. I'm sure maybe a lot of people plant trees to kind of walk away. Then it gives a good feeling planting trees, but then you walk away, you move on, and plant more trees elsewhere. What we really wanted to do, and this is what Super Projects, Fingal County Council, Arts Office, later the Arts Council, and the school itself, that this is what's special about this sustained and ongoing relationship with this space, that we could continue to develop the space as the trees grow, and until such time that straw mulch wouldn't be needed, because trees would have established their own kind of canopy and mulch there, that it's then a kind of sovereign, kind of wild space. So that was great. That's let this project go year after year after year, which is very, very hard when things are funded annually. And it was also kind of just to sustain the commitments to the trees, to the place, to the school, to the students. Now we're also growing up as, going through the complexities of puberty and whatnot, as the trees will grow, So, brilliant facility to activate this space with scientists, with artists, craftspeople, with other people from the Fingal County Council to kind of operate this kind of space, kind of transversely, transdisciplinary, interinstitutionality, bringing different kind of characters to play out their knowledge or their skills every week in the microforest. Kind of key thing to kind of harness this is this idea of convivial tools. So the idea of convivial tools is by a sociologist, Ivan Illich, and this is this idea that tools can connect us to one another, they can connect us to our environment, they can connect us to material, they can generate skill, they can generate belonging, they can generate exchange. A good example is the scythe, which is a beautifully haptic, embodied tool that we use now in NCD every year to put back the field. In contrast to the strimmer, which is kind of fairly obnoxious, you cut off from the world. So this idea of convivial tools, some examples there. Wood carving together. There's somebody grinding oak gall into it to make ink. charcoal making, a cauldron that we have to make elderflower tonic. We just did that last week. And these brochures kind of brought into this context. The humble wheelbarrow, spade and fork. When people are kind of choreographed in their use to work shoulder to shoulder and side to side, comes convivial tools. So these are tools that kind of keep us busy, but they also give us time to muse, to discuss, to philosophize, whether it be in our own head or with another. Smartphones, of course, are, in spite of their excess of social media, are not convivial tools. Just to kind of say that loud and clear. So then, this kind of great occasion to kind of, this idea, this concept of learning through teaching. Every week in the Microforest was different. We experimented, we tried new different things. Myself and very often class people or artists come, it was kind of used as this kind of space of radical pedagogy, try things out, see what happens. And this was a rather kind of rich kind of day 29, where we brought people from Trinity, Novel Eco Research Group. That's Dr. Marcus Collier, the head of botany in Trinity, but also lead on this really interesting project called Novel Eco. He brought his team, his research team, postdocs and and PhD candidates, so very high level learning. Also the field undergraduate students came along, and then of course the transition year group. So there was this kind of wonderful hosting and exchange of knowledge. And the guys kind of were charged with kind of connecting looking at the school plan as a whole to see how we could maybe come up with connect the microforest, create green corridors from the microforest to the microforest, from the microforest, and look at its potential for the school becoming this, expanded enclave of biodiversity, but also learning, So really, really interesting, great day. And everything kind of always framed with this kind of elemental element. So while the guys were working on their design propositions, we're also making charcoal, and kind of discussing carbon dioxide and as a greenhouse gas. Day 40, guys, this was a good day. This was one of the finest days. This was this idea of how to common knowledge. So again, as an extension of the generosity of super projects, which kind of has contemporary artists go in and fit their practice or interface their practice in a secondary school environment. My field students came and they were charged with running workshops based on their practices in the school with students. So to have that kind of, again, learning through teaching, but also to kind of create that intergenerational exchange. And this was actually an incredibly effective day. I spent the day just kind of grubbing around the perimeter, weeding bindweed. Do you have an issue with it? And I could just eavesdrop on these wonderful conversations and exchanges between students, like transition year, and then students in their late 20s, talking about creativity, talking about life, talking about our college, talking about college, talking about learning. It was a really, really effective workshop, which I hope to institute every year going forward. It was a really, and it was great. My students got paid as well to be there as well, so it's just kind of access to kind of, a challenge for them to kind of articulate their practice and to be able to common the skills and knowledge within their practice. And this is what we're up at now, guys. We're on 44 contact days, spread over 4 years. In case some of you are thinking, oh, this happened in the... So, and this is where we're at now. This is day 41, which happened this day last week. We've invited James Grace of Grace Designs to come and to work to make a portal, a timber portal, to kind of honour this space before we finally hand it over to the school. That's the students kind of taking a log, turning it into timber by debarking it, and ultimately a beam by using axe work. So that's where that's going to go. And then kind of finally, this was kind of I was pretty astonished. This is my first time back. Of course, nobody's there during the summer months, so the microforest does its own thing. So you come back and it's grown up. It's really grown up. Some of the trees are at the height of that being there. It's pretty impressive, 3 or 4 years. Things happen fast. things can heal fast and work fast. And he just had this kind of remarkable, you might have seen, I don't know if you noticed Erin earlier in the slideshow, there was an image of her with a tree, planting a tree in first year. This is her now in transition year. She spent that year, she spent considerable amount of time on this draw horse, you know, with a spoke shave knife. And here she's 3 years later, she just got right back on. She remembered the name of it and everything, which was kind of, you know, and she just got right back on it and just spent like the greater part of the day just carving a paddle to kind of stir our elderflower syrup with. But you have this kind of wonderful kind of effect going on here, and it kind of calls us to. It's difficult to describe that lynch. It's dappling with light. It's kind of the sunlight filtering through leaves with a little bit of smoke. We have an awful deficit in language, in the English language anyway. So of course the Japanese have a name for that. It's komorebu, you know. And I might go all Western and talk about eco-phenomenology, which is all about like the primacy and the importance of putting ourselves back in our bodies, you know, reconnecting and reconfiguring our senses, and the primacy of this and helping us to connect, to belong, and you know, to kind of, you know, acknowledge we're human after all, you know. So we have to get on to Macron Macron, whether there's an Irish term. There could well be, you know. But this kind of stuff isn't on the curriculum, it's not in any curriculum, but, you know, maybe it should be, you know. How bad, you know. So that's me, guys. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gareth, for that really insightful talk. I guess I'll get the ball rolling with a few questions and we'll throw it out to everyone else. I'm also going to try keep the nature puns to a minimum, but no promises. With that being said, my first question is, how did your creative practice grow into microforests? Thank you very much. I said I'd keep it to a minimum, I didn't say I wouldn't.
Yeah, so I've been working with wood for years as I'm socially engaged artist, and I've worked with wood as a kind of a malleable material that also carries a kind of biography with it. So those kind of projects range from bringing IKEA furniture to a small town in County Kerry and cannibalizing it, turning it into a big butter churn and producing bog butter, which we then buried in a barrel made out of more IKEA timber in the bog to become a bog butter to kind of confound future generations. So this was kind of like using IKEA timber. More recently, I've been working with bogwood from Eris, and within the kind of community that was impacted by the Corb gas controversy. So again, this kind of would have been material that would have been extracted and pulled out of the ground during the harvesting of the peat. But also when you look at the biography, the deep history of this material, this bogwood, this is wood that kind of died and was interred by the bog by a major shift in climate 4,000 years ago. So it's kind of like making a table, incidentally, to be used within that community to kind of discuss issues within that community. You know, the wood was really kind of charged with all this kind of deep time and history, which maybe the table could serve to create a bit of latitude with the kind of trauma of the last 16 years of what was done onto them. So that long history of working with wood, working with people who work with wood, and then wouldn't it be nice to grow trees? And then also kind of related to the kind of turn within my own practice, work with living things, work with life processes, promote biophilia. Biophilia being the love of life process and living things. Kind of readings in critical ecologies, Donna Haraway, how do we do sympoiesis, which is the creation with, rather than autopoiesis, which is I create on my own in my studio solitary. All of these kind of ideas kind of hinted towards, and then I've been reading about microforests for a few years, and the opportunity landed, and I just said quite spontaneously, let's do this.
Amazing. And I think in particular for me, this project has a lot of relevance because during lockdown, I was a young participant who was working on a long-term project. So I really understand the value of that for the young people involved in terms of getting together. But I was just wondering if you could kind of speak to their development. What was some of the highlights for them to actually be a part of this for the students? And like, is it different now post-lockdown than it was kind of during lockdown?
That's a good question in terms of the difference. I mean, obviously, that first group, the pioneers, they brought on one hand a kind of huge latent energy to the project, but also a huge reticence as well. And we all had different kinds of lockdown. That cut us off from the world we knew to different degrees. So they brought this remarkable energy that, the project was interrupted by a lockdown, and we just got it back on track to put the trees in the ground in March 2021. So it was really, but you could tell that they were really in a bad way after that lockdown, actually. We all were, I think. We got back in the world and then we were taken out of the world again. And I think that was the worst of all. So, so it's kind of like what I have ongoing in NCAD as well. What's wonderful is some of the teaching tactics, strategies, responses to pandemic. It's wonderful. We get to sustain them and we get to kind of keep them going and we get to legitimize them and we get to kind of value them. And, I kind of mentioned Aaron there because funnily enough, when I met them on Friday, I didn't fully recognize them because I hadn't seen them from Sid's first year, and they're right. So it was kind of like, and it's, oh my God, So it's kind of those kind of radical. It's such a radical time of change, and I'd like to say that having the trees grow as they matured, if they looked at them, gave them this kind of
that kind of sense of time passing as well.
Yeah. Or I'd like to think that way in future about these kind of projects that,
And it's kind of a really nice way of kind of grounding them within that school environment that they're actually, as they go through it, this is growing with them. So that's really, really beautiful way of kind of marking that for them. I'll open it up to questions. Does anyone have any?
I was wondering when you started, who did you approach about, planting the trees and where the funding came from in order to have the growth and how long it took to even think about that process?
This was really like different projects come from different places. Sometimes it's you're the kind of self-starter and you're pushing it and driving it. But I live in Kilkenny and I have 3 kids, 5 and under. So I wasn't looking for a job in Blanchardstown. I wasn't looking for a job in Blanchardstown. But so Super Projects, Rain Boot, approached and said like, look, we had this program we were going to do inside, and it's fallen through. We can't do it with the pandemic. So I hear you're developing outdoor stuff in NCAD, responses to the pandemic, to kind of bring people back together and, work with the health and safety and protocols around that. Would you like to do something in the school in Blanchardstown? And I said, and she said, the finance is there, the funding is there, it needs to be spent. She approached me in November, I think, late October. The funding is there, it just has to happen this year before the end of the year. And I just kind of said, well, I'll go and have a look. And I just kind of thought, usually coming to decisions are much more fraught and agonistic for me, or neurotic within my own head and practice. But this was just kind of spontaneous, frankly, because it just like now or never.
Yeah, personally, I was thinking about some kind of tree planting thing last year, and I didn't know where to go and who to talk to about such a thing, to develop something that would be about planting trees. And I'm kind of amused, because I covered your work in Leitrim, and the form of this is, it's kind of like the folly, and it's got yellow.
The Yellow Folly, oh my God, there's another time. Yes, the crash.
Folly is circular
Not the
and
pandemic,
it's
the
got
crash.
yellow with
Yeah,
it,
yeah, okay. Interesting, yeah. Thanks for the memory.
Thanks, Gareth. It's great. As an allegory or a metaphor, even just as a piece of sculpture that continually grows. I suppose I'm curious about a contract signed around who might look after it into the future. The school is obviously committed, right? Is that enough? Or is there something more formal around how it continues? And I suppose added to that, I mean, to maintain a 4-year durational artwork is not easy. Is it, again, is that within the school or Fingal? Have they bought into it on a kind of longer basis? How's that working?
So they're the best questions because, you know, a lot of artists have put trees in the ground and then kind of move on. A lot of people put trees in the ground and kind of move on. There's orchards going here, there, and everywhere. But, you know, things take maintenance and care. What's useful about the microforest idea is once it's established, it looks after itself, we hope. And then the existing excellent relationships with the existing groundskeeper. And also there's guys in there doing community service with a guy called Leo who's got a shed that's full of tools, which again was very, very useful. And Leo's guys go out and they maintain the edges. So there's that element. Going forward, this is the kind of thing, how do we hand it over? How do we hand it over? There's a room 10 meters, 5 meters from that there, it's a music room, and it's got like 12 to 15 Bowrons on the wall in it. And it took 4 years to get those I thought it was kind of like Bowrons in there. It's kind of like, you know, the resonance with the trees, you know, it took 4 years to get the Bowrons out there. We had to bring in an artist to do that. So you're always up against this kind of, you know, we have it in all our institutions, this impermeability. But rain and super projects, we want to kind of present to the school. We want to hand over to publication and disseminate that publication far and wide, which we're working on. We want to let the school know that this is here for you, you know, through education and NCAD. NCAD sends art student teachers there, trying to kind of get them to kind of like as a placement, special placement, would you do something in the microforest to keep it like, it's used as is. It's used as is. The teacher, the art school teacher, Mary is going to be doing Reiki session out there. It's used at lunchtimes. It's used as, you know, so there is that kind of pattern of use there, and I'd like to kind of communicate that to them. But also I want to kind of make a commitment that I bring my NCAD field class out maybe once a trimester to do work with a transition year group in the microforest to keep a relationship. That was really very fruitful, the kind of third level students meeting secondary level students.
Has there been interest from other schools since you started this? It seems like a gift in a way in a learning environment for other schools to kind of run with as well. I mean, you know, the schools have fantastic green spaces. They're not all playing fields, so, you know, there's endless possibilities, isn't there?
That's it, yeah, no, like totally, and there's microforests popping up all over the place. I don't own the idea. I think I just responded to a time, a place, a context, and I think the skills I would have brought to it, again, from socially engaged practice, would be the usership and the use of this space, and maybe kind of like the strategic thinking around it as well. So, yeah, and that's there's potential there that this becomes a thing that schools get. They put in for a microforest, and they, you know, and we. I was in them in the Netherlands. The Netherlands are big in them. So originally in Japan, then they spread to the kind of Indian subcontinent quite a bit. Do amazing work in like super hot cities, because trees, you know, kind of regulate water and also like temperature. They do amazing work, like these lifesavers. So I was in the Netherlands and I was looking at them, ones that are established, they're 10 years old. They're proper little woodlands. you know. So this is it's still tiny, but yeah, I mean, it's doing well. Yeah. Like, give it 500 years, is there just one oak standing there? I don't know. That'd be nice, you know, like full of oak gall wasps. We'll see.
Gina, you had a question?
Sorry, that was really interesting. That is really interesting. This is really interesting. I just want to kind of circle back a little bit to, I suppose, just to clarify as well in my head, this was funded through Fingal Arts Office.
Yes.
Okay. So would this fall within their public art?
It was Julie there, Julie Keane there, and she's the kind of youth outreach officer. We should have invited to today. Really.
I suppose what I'm just thinking
So
around
she's given the budget.
the legacy of the projects. Like, I know the usership of the project and the maintenance of the projects is to a certain extent is taken over by the school and the students in terms of they're empowered to do that. But I suppose where I'm just kind of wondering is it not viewed as a public artwork, in which case Fingal has a responsibility to ensure the long-term legacy of it?
It's kind of semi-permanent status, and but it's a very good question, and I can't speak for Fingal. There is the potential that they would resource a couple of ongoing engagements every year to maintain it. But what's really important, and this is what I sold to the school, is this thing will look after itself. You do need to look after the fence and the edges and the interior, but the trees, you don't need to go weeding. You might have to go pruning a little bit so you can get in and out. This is like wilded. I'm not using wilding terminology. It's wilded space. It's got its own logic and life going on. It'll look after itself.
Yeah, I suppose I'm thinking more in terms of the thinking around what the public art means when it is, particularly in this particular case, where it is funded or where it is supported through an institution, and maybe that more traditional viewpoint of, if it's a piece of sculpture, they will clean it every year and they will do X, Y, Z, as in if it's a bronze, women sitting outside the woolen mills with the shopping bags, they look after that. But yeah, I think I'm just trying to sort it out in my own head.
Public work. Like the thing that was there before was to be just kind of a workshop that would make artwork, but not a public sculpture. So it just escalated into like a piece of like land art, really, you know. So that needs to be kind of ironed out, this process of kind of like doing the publication. But as Anthony said, how to get it at other forms of legitimacy. So there's a registry of tiny forests, Europe, where you can put in and make a claim on, we have a tiny forest here, and there's certain criteria for that. I think we tick all the boxes, so we can get the certificate. Like, you know. So, but there's work to be done within the culture of the school that they kind of like fully know what this is. But they cumulatively, the amount of work we've done out there and the things we've done, they don't. As the school culture wouldn't fully know that. The principal does, but we'll get them in the staff room, and we'll unpack it, and it's for them to kind of like look after. I can't control that, you know. And a relationship with Fingal would be ongoing, would be really good to secure.
I think that point is actually really good to lead us into actually the group discussion in terms of that sense of ownership, care, legacy, and like where does it go afterwards, because I think that's also something that will speak to Anthony's piece as well, that kind of larger history there and like how we can build upon that. But thank you so much for your chat, and we have around 10 minutes or are we going to unpack?
What do you think, Nigel? Yeah, we really want to finish at 4 because we're conscious that we've really, we've had a long day and everybody has a Friday evening to get on with. And we've all had a really rich kind of day of it. So we do have an AGM online in November. I'm trying to remember the date, but we'll be circulating it. And maybe we would continue have the round table discussion as part of that. I don't know how people would feel about that. It just means we'll get out of the classroom a little bit earlier than planned, just before 4. What do you think? How are people's energy?
I think maybe if anyone's got any final comments about the day, reflections, we just do that here. Like,
Yeah, that sounds good.
as it is.
Yeah. Maybe a final question from one of our panel moderators in terms of just, like you're saying, Catherine, points of inspiration or wrap-ups, maybe.
Yeah, so if we're going to just do final thoughts, then we'll just do a final thank you for